Thousands join New Year's Day rally on universal suffrage. New Year celebrations around the world. And Kim Jong-un says the execution of his uncle brings unity to the party.
Good evening. Thousands rallied on the streets this New Year's Day, calling for universal suffrage and an open nomination of candidates so that anyone, including critics of Beijing, can stand in elections. Police say over 10,000 people took part at the peak of the rally. While most were there to voice their support for full democracy, others called on the government to focus on livelihood issues. Rani Samtani begins our coverage.
Give me universal suffrage and civic nomination, they chanted. Tell Leung Chun-ying to step down, others cried out. These were some of the demands protesters made this afternoon as they marched from Victoria Park to Chater Garden in Central.
And I'm here because I follow my classmates to come because I'm from the student unions from my university. So I'm here, yes.
Why do you think it's so important for Hong Kong to have universal suffrage?
Because it's our basic right, because we need to, it's the basic human rights of everyone.
At one point, members of the student group Scholarism tried to set up a small booth during the rally. They were quickly stopped by police. But universal suffrage wasn't all protesters called for. Some demanded a universal pension scheme, while others expressed opposition to the government's plans for mandatory drug testing and a garbage levy. Another group of protesters also demanded Beijing free Nobel Peace Laureate Liu Xiaobo and his wife, Liu Xia. Former Chief Secretary for Administration Anson Chan was there too. She repeated her call for the people to pay close attention to the government's public consultation document on election arrangements.
The Civil Human Rights Front expected around 50,000 people to join them, but the turnout seemed to be much less. As a result, organizers decided to delay the start of the rally in the hopes that more people would show up.
Once the group reached Chater Road in Central, members of the Civil Human Rights Front as well as Occupy Central organizers took turns to explain civil disobedience and how to protest in a peaceful manner. In a video today, Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying said he hopes to implement universal suffrage in Hong Kong while in office. Rani Samtani, TVB News.
Well, supporters and opponents of the Leung Chun-ying administration and the central government in Beijing also took to the streets today. As Evelyn Leung reports, tensions between the two sides ran high at one point.
Give Hong Kong a greater say in the one-way permit system, chanted members of the anti-red campaign who are against the central government's increasing influence on matters in the SAR. Hong Kong is my home, don't destroy it, shouted Beijing loyalists of the Defend Hong Kong campaign. These two groups of protesters got into a screaming match at Southern Playground in Wan Chai. Police officers waded in and used barriers to separate the two groups. The anti-red campaign organizer blamed the incident on Beijing loyalists' decision to set up a booth at the starting point of the rally. Usually these situations would have been avoided, but they decided to change their location at the last minute, he said. Members of the Defend Hong Kong campaign, however, said they would not get involved in any clashes and called on their opponents to be accommodating to different views. Meanwhile, another pro-government group, Voice of Loving Hong Kong, held a carnival at Tamar Park.
We support C.Y. Leung's government, because as he is the chief executive in Hong Kong, then we found that he should try his best to make the policy. Last year, we found that he do the things as promised. Then we will still support him.
He added that if their opponents tried to stop them from voicing out their opinions, they have no right to talk about democracy. Evelyn Lang, TVB News.
Well, the rally is still going strong in Central, with hundreds gathered at Chater Road. Many are expected to stay well into the evening, listening to talks on the fight for universal suffrage. Among the issues being discussed are ways demonstrators can protest peacefully and how to handle any police response. Well, for more on that, we turn to Vicky Kung, who's standing by right now live in Central. Over to you, Vicky.
Yeah, so Tony, apparently the most special part about today's rally is that organizers are really focusing a lot on educating the public about non-violence protests in Hong Kong. And then so far, the two organizers, the Alliance for True Democracy as well as Civil Human Rights Fronts, are organizing this workshop here, which started about half an hour ago. Lawmakers like Audrey Yu and Leung Kwok-kung have already shared their views on civil disobedience as well as civil nomination on election candidates just now. And right now on stage you can see Benny Tai, the organizer of Occupy Central, sharing his views. He will also demonstrate to protesters, a little bit later, how they should react if police carry them away by force. That's all I have for you now. Back to you in the studio.
All right, thank you very much, Vicky. And that was Vicky reporting live from Central. Meanwhile, about 62,000 people voted earlier today in the civil referendum held by the Occupy Central movement. Operators of the e-voting system reported no problems with hackers. And Vicky Kung tells us more on that.
All you need to vote is a valid Hong Kong ID card number. Crowds gathered to express how they would like to elect the chief executive in 2017. The poll was organized by the Occupy Central movement. The public opinion program at the University of Hong Kong and the Polytechnic University's Center for Social Policy Studies were commissioned to conduct the pilot test. The goal is to let the public express their views on the principles of CE election and to get familiar with e-voting operation. People either voted online or dropped by the polling station at the bandstand in Victoria Park. They could also download a smartphone application and then use their phone to vote on 3 propositions. This man says he wants to show his support, so he came in person. The polling started at 1 p.m. and ended at 6:30 p.m. Former Chief Secretary for Administration Anson Chan also cast her vote.
I urge all Hong Kong residents to come out and vote. What we want is the right to elect our leaders so that our leaders have a genuine mandate to govern Hong Kong. This will improve governance. We also want to see Hong Kong people having a genuine choice in electing their leaders and no screening mechanism.
Voters are required to be permanent Hong Kong residents who are aged 18 or above. But faults in the system made it possible for people to vote online after typing in children's ID card numbers. Organizers, meanwhile, believe the flaw will not defeat the purpose of the polling exercise.
We do not have the database of all registered voters and also the ID numbers of all Hong Kong citizens. So it's a kind of honest system. We relied on the honesty of all those who participate in this voting. And I think it's about how we should read the results. I think the civil referendum, we do not assert that this is representing the whole population. The result represents those who have participated in the voting, and that is it.
Setting up a polling station like this costs about $100,000, but it extends voting rights to people who aren't familiar with voting online. Occupy Central hopes to create 18 such stations for its civil referendum in June, but it's still hunting for locations, and it's calling for donations and support. Vicky Kong, TVB News.
And from Sydney to San Francisco, the world has been ringing in the new year today with extravagant fireworks displays. Alan Bookneer takes a look at some of the celebrations around the world.
In New York's Times Square, a sea of people from around the world braved frigid temperatures to usher in 2014. Australia was one of the first countries to welcome the new year, as more than 1 million people crammed Sydney Harbour to witness the exploding fireworks over the iconic Opera House and Harbour Bridge. Near Beijing, a light show lit up part of the Great Wall. while singers, dancers, and drummers performed on its ramparts. A spectacular light show and fireworks display illuminated buildings on the Bund in Shanghai. Moving west, the world's tallest building, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, exploded into a sea of lights. In Russia, Muscovites flocked to see the fireworks set off above Spasskaya Tower and the Kremlin. But there was also a somber mood. Russian President Vladimir Putin delivered his annual New Year's message, but he also vowed to annihilate all terrorists in Russia, talking tough after 2 suicide bombings earlier this week in Volgograd. In Paris, the famous Champs-Élysées was awash with lights, and the Eiffel Tower sparkled at the stroke of midnight. In the British capital, tens of thousands reveled along the banks of the River Thames to watch as fireworks showered landmarks, the London Eye and Big Ben. Across the Atlantic in Brazil, they may have trouble building football stadiums, but they do know how to party. Organizers say more than 1 million people gathered on Copacabana Beach in Rio de Janeiro, where they usually revel until the sun comes up. 2014 promises to be a big year for Brazil as it hosts the World Cup. Alan Bucknett, TVB News.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un rang in the new year by warning of nuclear disaster to those who wage war against Pyongyang. He also described the execution of his uncle as getting rid of factionist filth. So it came as no surprise when South Korean President Park Geun-hye vowed in her New Year message to strengthen the country's national security to protect against the North. Sonia Artero reports.
Kim Jong-un shared his intentions and policy goals for the new year in a message delivered on state television. In his 2014 statement was a stern warning to the United States and South Korea, telling them to stop conducting anti-North Korea military exercises. Kim said the U.S. and South Korean war maniacs have deployed legions of equipment for a nuclear war in and around the Korean peninsula and are going frantic in their military exercises for a nuclear war against the North. He also boasted of strengthening the country by having his once powerful uncle and mentor executed last month. Kim said, "We took the resolute measure of removing the factionalist filth lurking in the party and are 100 times more solid as a result." Even though tension between the two Koreas remains high, Kim expressed willingness to improve ties, saying it's high time to put an end to slander that brings no good to either side. Elsewhere in North Korea, senior officials gathered at the opening ceremony of a new ski resort following the controversy over Switzerland's refusal to allow the export of ski lifts to the isolated state. Kim Jong-un did not attend, so Cho Ryong-hae, the political director of North Korea's military, was left with the honors. In South Korea, President Park Geun-hye used her New Year message to announce her administration is working extra hard to defend the security of the state. She vowed to establish an impeccable national security system to deal with provocations from the North. She called this move key to reviving South Korea's economy. Sonia Artero, TVB News.
Latvia today joined the Eurozone as the Baltic country became the bloc's 18th member at midnight. The country of just 2 million people is banking on its experience with austerity to bring it prosperity in the currency union. Latvia's acting Prime Minister Valdis Dombrovskis said the adoption of the euro is an opportunity but not a guarantee of success. Dombrovskis led the country through its worst economic crisis since it left the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. The switchover ceremony was held where Latvia's crisis began, where the